Perhaps the most stressful and hardest part of a 1031 exchange is locating and identifying replacement property during your 45-day identification period. What types of property qualify? What are your options? What happens if you can't acquire the property identified? Let's unravel that mystery today on Go Ahead Ask.
Building wealth in real estate? Let the Exeter Group take the mystery out of how it's done on Go Ahead Ask.
Welcome to the Go Ahead Ask podcast by the Exeter Group, where we unravel the mystery of investment real estate. Our objective is to provide good quality investment information and education so that you as the real estate investor can make better informed investment decisions. I'm your host today, Bill Exeter. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Exeter 1031 Exchange Services. And the Exeter Group of Companies includes Exeter 1031 Exchange Services, which is a qualified intermediary or accommodator for 1031 exchange transactions. We administer all types of 1031 exchanges in all 50 states. It also includes Exeter Trust Company. Exeter Trust Company serves as custodian for self-directed IRAs and 401k plans, as trustee for title holding trusts or land trusts, as escrow agent for specialty holding escrows, and various other custody services. Here at Go Ahead Ask, we encourage your questions. So please, if you have a question or if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, go ahead and send it to us by email at ask@exeterco.com, or you can call us at area code 619-239-3091. If you love Go Ahead Ask, please like it, subscribe to it, share it, and comment on it. We will respond to all comments made. Today's podcast is called Stayin' Alive in Your 45. One of the biggest challenges investors face today when doing a 1031 exchange, especially with the fast-paced real estate market we're currently in, is locating and identifying replacement property during the 45 calendar day identification period. Questions are asked of us all the time, such as what type of real estate can I buy? What kind of real estate qualifies? What is qualified use? What is like-kind property? And what are my options? We're going to unravel that mystery today on Go Ahead Ask. So today we're really excited to have a special guest expert, Charles Jensen, who is Senior Vice President with Inland Securities Corporation. Charles has an extremely vast knowledge of commercial real estate and some of the specialty replacement property solutions we use in 1031 exchanges. So with that, let's kind of dive into Stayin' Alive in 45. Charles, I understand you're actually a guitar player too. So staying with our theme of Stayin' Alive in 45, maybe you can tell people a little bit about your musical background.
Yeah, I've been playing for over 25 years, and it's been a fun thing to do. I have a little recording studio out back where I just have a couple recording devices and just love to play. Classical rock, all kinds of music, but it's something I love to do in my free time.
And they can't see it behind you there, but I think behind you there on the walls, you've got some guitars up on the wall too, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, this is technically my little recording studio, if you will, and I got guitars hanging all around here. So it's my little man cave where I can come in here and pull anything down and play it every now and then.
Well, today one of the things we're going to talk about is kind of the difficult real estate market that we're faced with today, where investors are getting multiple offers, bidding wars, getting prices well above the asking price. There's limited inventory. There's certainly a housing shortage. We're coming out of COVID-19. We have phenomenally low interest rates. The Biden administration is proposing changes to 1031 exchanges. So all of that kind of comes together to complicate a 1031 exchange transaction. So we're going to kind of go into a quick refresher course on what's qualified use and what is like-kind and what are those requirements. Strategies for listing and selling your relinquished property, strategies for making offers and acquiring your replacement property. And then we're really going to dive in deep to replacement property options and choices that you might have. So a lot of times there's things you may not have thought of. And if you're watching this podcast, you're probably in your 45 days or coming up on it, and you're worried about what am I going to do and how I'm going to find replacement property. So we really wanted to talk about that as a solution. What are your options, and just kind of expand upon your knowledge there to help you out there. So first, let's dive into qualified use property. And this is probably the most important area of the 1031 exchange, where the properties you sell and the properties you acquire through your 1031 exchange have to be held for some type of rental, investment, or business use. So as we're going through the presentation today, keep in mind that's one of the primary objectives. Whatever you sell, whatever you buy has to be held for some type of rental, investment, or business use. Properties that are acquired to rehab and flip or convert to condos from apartments or develop or build, etc. Those are all types or examples of properties that are acquired and held for sale. You're really buying, and then you're either rehabbing or building or developing or converting and then selling. So you're really holding for sale as opposed to holding for investment. So the real issue is being able to prove that you intended to hold both the relinquished and the replacement property for rental, investment, or business use. So that's really the bottom line. The second area, which is probably the second most important, is the like-kind requirement. And this is going to help set the stage for all of the replacement property solutions we talk about today. And so like-kind gets confused a lot, especially on material you see on the internet and brochures and whatnot. A lot of investors still think that it has to be condo for condo or it has to be apartments for apartments. And that is not true. Like-kind simply means that you are selling real estate and you have to buy or reinvest in real estate. That's all it means. So it's a very broad, very wide open topic. The only limitation is that you have to sell U.S. real estate and buy U.S. real estate, or if you're doing a foreign property exchange, you're selling foreign property and you exchange for other foreign property. You can't go between U.S. and foreign assets. So let's quickly talk about what's not like-kind. Just to be clear, we just talked about what is like-kind. Let's cover what's not like-kind. Non-like-kind property would be anything held for personal use. So your primary residence, a second home, a vacation property. And there's a lot of gray area there because obviously you could use it for both. And so the question is it really held for investment or is it really held for personal use? So we have to drill down and really ask the question, what is it? What's the usage? Can it qualify for a 1031 exchange or not? And it certainly can change. So if it's a personal use, you could always stop using it personally, convert it to investment property, and after a period of time, it would qualify as like-kind property, or qualified use property. So that's really what it boils down to there is personal use versus investment property. And for 1031 exchange purposes, it has to be held for rental, investment, or business use. So that's really the requirement. Other areas of non-like-kind would be entities. So for example, if you own real estate in a partnership, an LLC with multiple members that's treated as a partnership, in a corporation or something like that, remember you don't own real estate, the entity does. So if you're selling the shares of stock or the membership interest in the entity, it probably doesn't qualify for 1031 exchange treatment. If the entity is going to sell the real estate and you're getting a cash distribution from the entity, you probably can't do a 1031 exchange. But there are ways to address those issues. It gets a lot more complicated and it's above and beyond our topic for today, but just want to throw that out there. So if you own real estate in an entity, make sure that you talk to us or your advisors to see, who's the real taxpayer and who actually can qualify for 1031 exchange treatment. So with that, let's kind of go into some of the topics we want to cover. First of all, it's a fast-paced market today. It is definitely a seller's market. That puts the seller in the driver's seat. So when you're selling your relinquished property, you're kind of in charge. So there are some strategies that you can use for that, such as contingencies. So you might be able to sell the property and make it contingent upon the identification and acquisition of a replacement property. Buyers may be willing to wait until you find the property. You might be able to put it under contract and ask for a longer term closing. You might get the buyer to agree to, 1 or 2 or 3 30-day options to extend. So anytime you can extend the close helps. You might offer to lease the property to the buyer so the buyer can start using it, and then you can sell and close when you're ready. The issue here, the strategies here are really to help you delay the closing. Your deadlines to start looking and identifying replacement property doesn't start running until the sale actually closes. So if you can delay or kick the can down the road, so to speak, then you buy yourself more time to look for replacement property. That's really the name of the game here. On the flip side, when you're in the middle of your 1031 exchange and you're looking for replacement properties, you've got the same type of issues, same type of choices. However, in this case, it's still a seller's market. You're the buyer now. So the sellers probably are much less likely to cooperate. But if you can get a seller to cooperate, if you can get a long-term contract, long-term closing, options to extend, maybe you offer to lease the property and pay them a monthly lease payment to give you more time to get your sale ready to close. Those are strategies you can use on both sides of the equation to help timing. It's all about timing, getting your ducks lined up in a row and ready for closing processes. So those are kind of strategies you can take a look at and consider. You can also consider sweetening the pot, maybe a higher earnest money deposit, maybe a non-refundable early release of deposits. There's all sorts of ways to get the seller to cooperate, but it is a difficult market, and that's where it gets tough when you're doing a 1031 exchange. So with that, let's jump into some of the replacement property options and the choices that you might have. And I guess one of the ways to break this down is there's active real estate, there's passive real estate, and then as I like to refer to it as there's kind of real estate off the beaten path. I know that sounds odd, but we'll cover that in a minute. Active real estate, of course, is you go out and probably work with your realtor, your licensed agent, and you go out and look for real estate and you acquire that real estate and you're actively managing it. You're actively involved in the property management, the repairs and maintenance, etc. Passive real estate is the same type of thing where you go out and find property, but it's property that you don't have to you don't have to actively manage. And so we'll talk about which ones are active and which ones are passive. And then a lot of the real estate that's off the beaten path is also somewhat on the passive side. So with that, let's kind of get into it first. A quick summary, replacement property can come in all sorts of asset classes. So we were talking about what's like kind, what's qualified use. So a quick list of like kind property, because it's real estate for real estate, is the following. You can exchange into or out of or between single families, multifamily properties, commercial office, retail, industrial, storage facilities, vacant, undeveloped land, farmland, ranch land, vineyards, timberland. All of that is considered like kind because you're selling real estate and you're buying real estate. When we get into off the beaten path, that's going to include real estate interests like oil and gas interest, mineral rights, water rights, air rights, and fractional ownership interests. And fractional ownership can include things like syndicated tenant in common investment properties, or TICs. You don't see very many of those today. That was pre-2008. There's a few of those left, but not that many. And today, the real big one in terms of syndicated properties is the Delaware Statutory Trust, or DSTs. And with that, we're going to take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by our sister company, Exeter Trust Company. Did you know that all individual retirement accounts are self-directed IRAs? It's because you choose where to put them. You choose whether to put your self-directed IRA at a bank or at a securities or brokerage firm or a life insurance company. So that makes it self-directed. But did you also know that all IRA custodians are not created equal? Most IRA custodians, like the banks, the securities firms, and the life insurance companies, limit you to publicly traded investments such as stocks and bonds and mutual funds. But some IRA custodians, like Exeter Trust Company, allow investors to invest their IRA funds in other alternative assets such as real estate. Investors can acquire real estate, mortgages, deeds of trust, or tax lien certificates inside the IRA as an investment inside the IRA. To learn more, call Exeter Trust Company at area code 307-222-8750 or visit them on the internet at exetertrustcompany.net. And we're back with Go Ahead Ask Podcast. We've been talking about replacement property structures and options and choices you might have. So a couple of passive investment structures that you might want to consider, and you may not realize that they qualify, is the following. First one we should talk about is net lease properties. And net lease is really where you go out and acquire 100% of the property. And generally it's leased to one tenant, although it could be multiple tenants, but generally it's a single tenant net lease property. And it might be a Taco Bell, a Starbucks, a Walgreens, a CVS pharmacy, things like that. And then you're getting one check every month from them. You're getting a net check basically. And there's all sorts of net lease. I just call it net lease, but you'll probably you probably have heard it referred to as either single net, double net, triple net lease is probably one of the most common, or absolute net. But all of that kind of falls under the net lease properties where you're really just getting a net check. Each of those categories has a different level of responsibility by the tenant, what they do. And Charles, what have you seen out there in terms of net lease properties?
You see a lot of, in the DST world, you'll see companies that will package up, retail type properties where the tenant is responsible for the maintenance, the parking lots, the roofing and all that, all the ongoing maintenance. So you'll see that out in the stratosphere of DST world today. One of the positives of that is you get stable income. It's like a bond. So you get income along the way that comes every month into your bank account. But one of the negatives of that type of real estate is the fact it's like a bond. In a rising rate environment, it's difficult for these net lease properties to keep up because they have small rent escalations, sometimes tied to consumer price index. Sometimes it's built in, but not like apartments or storage. You'll get higher rent increases, but the positive here is you get stable income.
And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for, is either get rid of property management headaches or that stable income, and that maybe they're less worried about the value of the property per se. They just want that income that's very, very predictable. But that's a great point, is it's very much tied to interest rates, and especially at these phenomenally low interest rates, you have to kind of plan that into your budget or your cash flow projections for the future, because the cash flow may not increase that much as you indicated. And as interest rates go up, and I think we all agree they have to go up, the question is when and how high. At that point, you've acquired the property at a very low interest rate. A potential buyer may acquire that property at a much higher interest rate, so they're probably willing to pay less than what you paid for the property. So that's part of that risk. Now, if you hold it for 20, 22, 25 years, whatever the term of the lease is, you can minimize some of that risk. On the other hand, the closer you get to that end 20, 22, 25 years, you have fewer buyers who are willing to buy that. A lot of them want at least 50% or more left on the term of the lease. So that's always one of those risks as well. Second area is UPREITs, and you don't see a whole lot of those out there. The UPREIT is kind of a two-step process in most cases. The investor is going to sell their property, do a 1031 exchange like they normally would, but instead of going out and finding property they're going to acquire, they identify a fractional interest in a large asset that the REIT has packaged or put together. So maybe they acquire a 0.0025% interest as a tenant in common with a bunch of other investors inside of this large asset, whatever that might be. And that's the first step or first segment of that transaction. That's the 1031 part. You've sold, you do an exchange, you buy a fractional interest in a large asset as a tenant in common. Then there's a holding period, could be 1 up to 2 years perhaps, to show and demonstrate intent to hold for investment purposes. And then the second stage kicks in where that entire property and all of the tenants are contributed into the umbrella partnership. That's the UP and UPREIT. Now you're part of the REIT, and you get the benefits of diversification, you get the benefits of the cash flow from the REIT. et cetera. But there's two real negatives. I guess, well, they're not necessarily always negatives. It depends on the investor's perspective. But there's two big items you need to be aware of. One is now you're in a security, so you can no longer 1031 exchange in the future. The second is if the sponsor sells that asset that's held, that you exchange into and that's held in that partnership, it could trigger your taxable gain. So you have to be aware of the fact that you might lose control of the recognition of your taxable gain somewhere down the road. Maybe, I don't know, Charles, you have any comments on that? Any thoughts on UPREITs and what you've seen out there?
So the UPREIT is interesting because in the past until today, we haven't seen as many UPREITs out there. They'll probably become more and more prevalent moving forward. But the UPREITs are interesting because there are pros and cons of an UPREIT structure. So for example, a lot of people that use an UPREIT today, they don't put all their money into an UPREIT. Typically, they have $1 million 1031 exchange. Maybe they take $100,000 of that $1 million and they put it into an UPREIT for liquidity. As you mentioned, after 2 years, they can start to pull some money out and get some liquidity. But they put the rest of the money into a DST or a typical exchange. The benefits are you get liquidity after 2 years, right? The negative is you're in this fund, this umbrella partnership that goes in perpetuity. So it can go on indefinitely for a certain set amount of time, depending on the deal. And what happens is as soon as you sell out of it, you're selling out of the shares of that umbrella partnership. You have a taxable event. So your exchange journey ends at the end of you selling out of your UPREIT. That's the downside of it.
And it sounds like the last few years, especially since the Tax Reform Act of 2017, UPREITs have lost some of the favor in the market. But potentially with the tax increases that are coming, I think that's going to kind of be the turning point there in the UPREITs. And that's what you referred to, is the UPREITs may become more popular over the next couple of years?
Yeah, that could be the case where, in the current proposal under the Biden administration, under the current budget they put out last Friday, there was no mention of UPREITs. So you could see more UPREITs forming in the future.
I mean, the next category is kind of the general tenants in common structure. And this was kind of a big one prior to 2008 and the Great Recession. And, really the structure was that you'd sell to a 1031 exchange, buy a fractional interest in a very large property as a tenant in common, and you could have up to 35 investors. But I think the lenders quickly found during the Great Recession that dealing with problems that came up on the properties and stuff required all 35 investors to make a unanimous decision, which is kind of like herding cats. And so it makes it very difficult to kind of get everyone to on a consensus basis. So that kind of, the lenders kind of said, we're not going to lend to TICs anymore. And now the focus is going to be the Delaware Statutory Trust. So maybe if you can comment on kind of that transition and what happened and why.
So the tenant in common was more prevalent in the mid 2000s. It came out in the year 2002-22, the revenue code, allowed for 35 investors to exchange together into one investment. And this created a problem. If that investment was $35 million and there's 35 people, the minimum investment was $1 million, had high minimums. But also with 35 investors, they all had decision-making abilities. Imagine having 35 cooks in the kitchen. You're going to burn that meal every time, right? So that started to fall to favor as the banks stopped lending as much to the TIC structure. And that's where the Delaware Statutory Trust took over. They call it like TIC 2.0 because the DST was seen widely as a replacement to the original structure of technology, or if you will, the TIC method.
So that really gives investors who would like to get involved with some of those large assets who can't the ability to 1031 exchange out of their current property and get into properties, large assets that they can now be part of, because it's just a fractional ownership position. It might be 0.0025% or something like that. And it really allows them to get out of property management headaches. And really the DST takes over all the property management. There's one person on title, so the lenders are happy. They make the decisions. So I guess the downside would be that if the investor wants to be in control of the property, et cetera, the DST would not be for them. If the investor wants to get rid of property management headaches, then it would be perfect for them.
Yeah, a lot of times when you see a TIC investment today, it's maybe a handful of friends, a handful of family members that know each other that create a tenant in common structure to have complete control over that. So it's rare today to see the 35 investors together in a TIC. It's probably 1% of the market, if that, but very much more common to see a grouping of investors that's larger in a Delaware statutory trust.
Actually, that's a good point. So I've made the comment that TICs were really prior to 2008, but that's the syndicated TICs. So, like you just said, a lot of friends and family, just get together 5 or 10 people and buy property together. So it's kind of a private tenant in common investment structure. It's not syndicated. So those are still fairly common. You see those all the time. It's the syndicated TICs that are kind of out the door. And then, real estate that's off the beaten path, we kind of mentioned those briefly, but you've got the oil and gas interests. Oil and gas can be really acquired in a number of different ways. One is you can go out and buy real estate that has oil and gas on the property, and you're buying real estate, so it certainly qualifies. Another possibility is you can go out and actually acquire the leasehold interest. So perhaps you've got a 30-plus year lease on real estate and gives you the right to go in and drill on the property. So that would be another way, perhaps an easement, so you can get access to the property and it's an easement in perpetuity. So there are different ways that you can kind of buy some type of an oil and gas interest that would qualify for 1031 exchange purposes. Then you've got air rights and water rights. Air rights and water rights typically run with the property. So you could actually sell or buy air rights or water rights. It's conveyed by deed typically. And those would qualify for 1031 exchange treatment. Obviously, those are off the beaten path. You don't see that a whole lot, but there are sophisticated investors who specialize in that type. And then just general mineral rights and whatnot can all qualify as like-kind property. So a lot of stuff that's kind of off the beaten path there that works. And why don't we dive in a little deeper? One of the issues that investors have today, of course, is identifying property, finding property that makes sense. And so we look at the Delaware Statutory Trust as one of those options. Charles, you want to maybe go a little deeper on the topic of DSTs and how that could be like a primary investment strategy versus a backup investment strategy, et cetera. There's a lot of uses for that.
Absolutely. I figured the best thing to do today is probably to go to the 6 major bullet points, salient points of a Delaware statutory trust. So people might realize if this is something for them or something they want to investigate further. And the first major point is this, is the DST came about in the year 2004-86 of the Internal Revenue Code. And the first thing it does is it allows for access to institutional quality, high quality properties. And what I mean by that is this: with up to 500 investors into a Delaware statutory trust, imagine what you could buy. The minimum investment's $100,000. Maybe you have my 100,000. You have your million bill, or someone else's 10 million or 100 million. Imagine that times 500 people. Now you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars. What could you buy? You could buy, an ESPN headquarters, an AT&T headquarters. You could buy an Amazon facility. You could buy a lot of beautiful properties that are out there in the market today. You could buy apartment buildings, hospitals, storage facilities. So the first bullet point is you get access to higher quality properties, stuff that you couldn't access on your own. It'd be very difficult to access as an individual. Now you're touching the stuff that institutionals have access to, the wealthy family offices, institutional buyers that can reach. The second thing is this, is no management responsibilities in a DST. So imagine, we mentioned herding cats with the 35 people in a TIC. Imagine 500 people in a Delaware statutory trust. That'd be very difficult. Again, 500 people in the kitchen cooking a meal, you're going to burn the meal every time. It's near impossible. So what we do is the DST industry allows Inland, or the sponsor of the DST, to be the trustee of the trust. So we have a investment committee that makes the decisions as to when to sell the property, how to manage it, how to do everything. So if there's a water heater blows up in the middle of the night, we handle it. Tenant doesn't pay rent on time, we handle it. So it gets you out of the tenants, the toilets, the trash, the termites, continuous taxes, TROs, anything dealing with management of the 1031 exchange, and lets you focus on, what you want to focus on. Time with your kids, time with your family, the ability to go out and to do the things that you want to do versus spending all your time on the tenants. The third thing is diversification. In a DST, it could be one property. It could be this big blue chip company by itself inside of the DST, or it could be maybe 5 apartment buildings in Florida, hypothetically, right? It could be 30 storage facilities in Texas in one portfolio, one DST portfolio, hypothetically. Or it could be 5 hospitals in Arizona in one hypothetical DST. So imagine if you're selling that one duplex for $1 million in Santa Monica, California, and you're investing that into 3 different DSTs, the 3 I mentioned. Now you have 40 properties in 3 states in 3 asset classes. Are you diversified? I would say yes. It gives you great diversification. Good luck finding 40 properties in 3 states and 3 asset classes in the 45 days allotted to you in the IRS timeline. So the DST gives you a lot more diversification, again, steady monthly income, and access to institutional quality properties. I personally have 3 different DSTs with Inland myself. Every first of the month, I receive a distribution that's usually direct deposit into my account. Every quarter, I get an update. At the end of the year, I receive an information substitute 1099. And what this does is it gives me one form per DST that I give to my accountant. My accountant plugs them into Schedule E, the same place you put rental income in a property. When he plugs them into Schedule E, you get all the income and depreciation passed along to you. So again, it's a great way to get out of the management, get a monthly steady income, quarterly updates, end of the year tax forms that are very easy to plug and play into your Schedule E where you put rental income anyways. The next bullet point is this, we know in exchange rules that if you sold $1 million property, you have to go back into $1 million in real estate, equal or greater. Anything less is taxable. So if you sold $1 million property and you bought an $800,000 property, you exchanged down. The $200,000 you did not exchange is taxable, right? So you can do partial exchanges, but most people want to exchange equal or greater. Anything less is taxable. So think about this when it comes to debt. Maybe you have a duplex in Santa Monica, California, where it's $1 million property, but $500,000 of that is debt that you have from a bank. Logically, if you sold the property, the bank gets their $500,000 back upon the sale of the relinquished property. The funds go to Exeter, where it starts the 45 days. But what's left over is the $500,000 that you started with in equity. And that equity is invested into your DST or replacement property. But see, most people have to get back up to the $1 million sale price, net of all fees. And so what they do is they go out and get a new loan from a third-party bank to get back to the $1 million level. Now imagine this in a DST. What I'm saying here is you need to replace debt. If you're at 50% loan to value, you need to go back into 50% loan to value, equal or greater. If you have $1 million, you need to go back in equal or greater. So in a Delaware statutory trust, it's difficult to get 500 people approved for financing. So what we do is we're allowed per the IRS to put one loan on the property as a DST sponsor. You, the investor, are allowed to absorb our loan per your loan requirements per the IRS. So if you sold out of a 50% loan to value property, you can go back into a 50% loan to value inland DST. You need to replace your debt equal or greater. Anything less is taxable. Now you can't come out of pocket the difference in cash to make up any kind of discrepancies in the funds, but most people don't have the $500,000 laying around. So typical DSTs out there, some may have zero debt. For people that don't have debt, don't want debt, and don't need debt. Some have 40, 50, 60, 80% loan to value. Why? They're staggered in the industry to make sure you get the loan to value that you need. You can even blend them. If you come out at 25% loan to value, you can put half of your money into property number 1, which is a zero debt deal. Property number 2 is a 50% loan to value deal. And half of that is 25%. So you can mix and match the DST loan to values to get the exact loan to value that you need. Now, some people also use this as a strategy for investment planning with their estate planning attorney. So what you could do is, if you have your revocable living trust, you can put a Delaware statutory trust inside of that. That way, you retire from the real estate, the tenants and toys and trash. You get a monthly income. You also get to pass it on to your heirs upon death with a step up in basis to market value under current tax law. So it's a great way to pass on real estate without the fighting. Imagine you pass away without a DST and you have an apartment building. Your kids are going to fight over who's going to manage it, how much to manage it for, when to sell it, all these things that arise, and who wants their kids fighting upon death. The DST eliminates that, gets them out of the management, gets them monthly income stream without the hassle of the tenants and toilets and trash. And the last thing is you can use a DST as a backup strategy. So a lot of times we know the 3 property rule. You can sell a property and go into 3 replacement properties or use the 200% rule. Either way, you can go into multiple properties. And what's neat is a lot of people doing a real estate transaction will sell their one property and they're identifying that one property. But wouldn't it be great to identify property number 2 and 3 as a DST, just as backup? Costs no extra money. And it's a great way to ensure, if you will, that your exchange goes through. Because we know after the 45 days, if you've identified something that fell out of escrow, you're going to run into some problems. This is a great way to identify and to make sure your exchange goes through. Because in summary, the DST is pre-purchased. We bought it in advance, right? So you're not worried about the 45 days. You're picking from a menu of different companies and different deals are in the market. And much like you go into a restaurant, you're ordering a burger and fries, or salad, whatever you want. You just order off the menu of available DSTs at the time. And because they're pre-closed, you can take advantage of these deals because the debt's already done, due diligence is already done in advance. These are put to you in a way that you can select from them, get a reservation with the company, and get locked into your deal. So that's pretty much it, Bill, as far as the 6 major bullet points of, no management responsibilities, steady monthly income, high quality properties, diversification. You don't have to take out a loan. You can absorb the debt of the DST, get all the depreciation of the debt without the hassle, use this as a backup strategy, or put it into your estate plan. This is a great way to do that.
And we've seen a number of clients that, sell, they're in the middle of the 1031 exchange, they go to find their own replacement property, and all of a sudden they learn quickly that for some reason they can't qualify for financing. And it might be that they're retired, they have no earned income, they're self-employed, what have you. And with the DST, they don't have to qualify for that financing. They just, sign up, and if they buy a 0.0025% interest, they get the same 0.0025% of any debt that's out there. And so that can not only have backup for your identification purposes, but it's kind of a backup in case your financing, falls apart too. And then you get those clients who actually do go out and buy their own property, but they have a sliver of cash left over. And historically, before the DSTs came out, if it was $50 or $75 or $100,000, it's not enough to go out and really take down another property. So they'd have to pay tax on it. Where now they could actually put that sliver of cash into a DST and defer the payment of taxes on that one as well.
Absolutely. It's a great strategy in a lot of different ways. And it's one that a lot of people are not aware of. So this is a great way to, again, back yourself up or to just find something in that 45 days, because we've already put the properties into the DST. We're closed. We're ready to go. You're not worried about trying to find that property.
And probably one of the ways we can kind of wrap up the topic of what to invest in is what happens when the 1031 exchange fails. And certainly, like we talked about, this is a crazy market is probably the best way to describe it. It's fast paced and multiple offers and bidding wars and all of that. And so there are investors who are in the middle of a 1031 exchange, and for whatever reason, they just can't identify or can't actually acquire their replacement property. So the 1031 exchange fails. At that point, it's taxable. They report it just like it was a taxable sale as opposed to a 1031 exchange. So what do? What can they do to kind of survive that, if you will, or kind of save the failed 1031 exchange routine, I guess is one way to put it. And one of those options is a qualified opportunity zone. So there's pros and cons with that as well. But a lot of folks have been asking us, can I take my proceeds and invest or buy property in a qualified opportunity zone? And the answer there is no, because the qualified opportunity zone requires that the property be in a fund. Most of these funds are structured as an LLC, and people are investing in the LLC. So it's a multiple member LLC. So you can't use your 1031 exchange to buy property located in a qualified opportunity zone. That won't get you the benefits of the qualified opportunity zone. Then they're asking, well, can I just identify and acquire an existing qualified opportunity zone fund? And the answer is no, because you're buying a partnership interest. You're not really buying real estate. But the qualified opportunity zone can be a great backup strategy if your exchange does fail for whatever reason. So maybe if you want to comment a little bit on the qualified opportunity zones you've seen out there, how they're structured, and maybe how that could kind of support a failed 1031 exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of opportunity zones out there that exist, and again, they're great because if you've passed that 45-day period, again, you're going to get some tax benefits. Do you want me to talk a little bit about how they work and the ones that are out there that we've seen as of late?
That'd be super, because I think a lot of investors are still really fuzzy on what is it and how does it work.
Yeah, so when you think about it, the opportunity zones came out in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And when you look at a piece of real estate that you're selling, clearly the 1031 exchange is the more viable option for anyone. There's a lot more bells and whistles to it that I'm not going to get into. But if you have a failed exchange, the opportunity zone is a great way to take advantage of another tax ruling. So what it allows you to do is allows you to sell any kind of gain, basically, and take that gain and put it into an opportunity zone fund. Opportunity zones were created in a bipartisan way, Democrats and Republicans. So Tim Scott of South Carolina and also Cory Booker of New Jersey, two senators, Republican and Democrat, got together and said, there's got to be a way to take these private funds and put them into good use in these communities. And this is where the opportunity zones were created. And these are usually areas, these opportunity zones are created by governors of each state, designated by governors of each state. There's 8,700 of them nationwide. And they put them in areas where there's a lower median family income, areas where there's higher unemployment, higher poverty rate, if you will. So the deal is this: if we invest those funds into the opportunity zone area, and so we buy a $10,000 apartment building, we need to put $10,000 back into redevelopment on the property. If we hold that investment for 10 years, investors get out tax-free on the growth. So the way it works is like this. Let's use stock, a gain on stock as an example, or your busted exchange, even better, right? You've got $1 million gain on a busted exchange. All you have to do is put the gain in there. Maybe that's from a $2 million sale of a property, but it was $1 million gain. So it's just the gain you put into the opportunity zone fund. Once you put it in the fund, you're going to defer your taxes, right? You're not going to owe any taxes on the gain until the tax year 2027, where you're going to owe, depending on your situation or your time frame, you'll get a 10% step up in basis, right? So discount, you'll reduce your taxes. And if you hold it in that opportunity zone fund for 10 years, you get out tax-free on the growth. So a lot of people don't realize that you are going to owe taxes at some point at a reduced rate in 2027. But again, all the growth on the $1 million you invested, you get out tax-free if you held it for 10 years. So there's opportunity zone funds out there that exist. We have one. There's other companies out there that have them as well. But again, the intention is typically to hold those funds for 10 years to allow investors to maximize their benefits. So this is a great thing to do for everyone that's busted their exchange. They're past the 45 days and you're within the 180. This is a good way to get some tax benefits.
And you brought up a good point. You mentioned, taxable gain. And so I kind of started off the topic with what about a failed exchange? But we get calls all the time where someone is selling a business or stocks or bonds or, any other type of asset that's not real estate. And those don't qualify for 1031 exchange treatment. So the qualified opportunity zone is a great way to at least defer the taxes for about 5 years. And the new investment would be tax-free if they hold it for the 10-year period. So that really covers a lot of other areas, but it's also a great backup strategy for 1031 exchanges. The other question we get a lot of along the same lines is, well, what if I don't want to do that? What if I got a failed exchange? I'm just going to pay the tax. So the one thing I want to throw out there is, we're coming up on the middle of June here, so we're almost in the second half of 2021. And once you pass the halfway point there, your 180 days for an exchange lands in the following tax year, which would be 2022. So in that case, if you sell in July or later and the end of your 180-day deadline lands in 2022, and your exchange fails, depending on how it's structured, how you identify assets in the property during the 45-day period, et cetera, even in a failed exchange, you could defer the gain into the following tax year. So that gets really complicated, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So those of you who are listening who have a failed exchange, don't want to look at the qualified opportunity zone, there is an ability to at least defer the taxes into the following year. Now, the proposed tax increases may make that a really bad idea. But structuring this through the 1031 exchange with a failed exchange, it pushes it into next year, but you can elect to take the tax hit this year. So if you have a failed exchange and you decide to push it into next year, you're doing your tax return and you realize, wow, it would have been better to take the hit in 2021. You can elect to do that and actually take it in 2021. So it kind of gives you an option there, depending. And as I was talking, it kind of brought me back to the DST too. One of the Biden proposals in the American Families Plan was to limit the 1031 exchange. And part of that was to limit it to $500,000 in taxable gain. His budget's now come out where that $500,000 limit has been increased to $1 million limit. But that may be an opportunity where an investor is selling an asset and maybe they have a really large gain in one asset. By using the DSTs, they might be able to split that gain and allocate that deferred gain over a number of DSTs so that it's under whatever that limit is. So if that happens to go through the legislative process and actually gets passed into law, in the future when those DSTs go full cycle and they sell, each of those would have a gain less than the $500 or less than the $1 million limit.
Yeah, you could see people, selling a $2 million property with $2 million gain, putting $1 million to DST if they're married under the proposal, and then taking the other $1 million and paying the taxes maybe or do something else with it. But it could be a really good spot to put, a certain amount into the DST upon the sale.
So a lot of good planning opportunities there, depending on what happens. So we'll have to see what happens with the Biden proposals. Any final wrap-up comments you'd like to throw out there to the listeners?
No, I just say, just recognize all of your options that are out there. And again, the DST might be one, opportunity zone might be one, but just realize that these exist, because that's the thing is knowledge is power, and knowing that you have something out there that is pre-packaged, ready to go. You have options right now.
And thank you for listening to Go Ahead Ask podcast today. Charles, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. That was a lot of great information. That's the name of the game, is for us to provide better information so investors can make a better informed investment decision. So for Go Ahead Ask, if you have questions or you have topics you'd like us to cover in the future podcast episodes, give us a call, send us an email. You can email us at ask@exeterco.com. You can call us at 619-239-3091. And Charles, if someone wants to get a hold of you, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, feel free to send me an email at cjensen, Jensen, at inland-securities.com. Inland and the little dash mark hyphen, securities is plural.com.
Perfect. And thank you again, everyone, for tuning in today and listening to the podcast. If you liked it or loved it, please like it, subscribe to it, share it, and comment on it. We will respond to all of those questions. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Go Ahead Ask with the Exeter Group. Join us for our next episode when we further unravel the mysteries of real estate.